All right, let's jump right in, shall we? We're about to crack open one of the toughest exams in India, the National Defense Academy Math paper. Yeah, the NDA exam. And trust me, this is way more than just a test. It's like an intellectual gauntlet designed to find the absolute sharpest young minds in the country.
And you can feel the heat right from the cover sheet. I mean, just look at these numbers. 120 questions, 150 minutes. That gives you what, a minute and 15 seconds for each one. And you get 2.5 marks for a right answer, sure, but mess up, you get penalized. The pressure is on like from the absolute get-go.
So how in the world do you tackle something like this? Well, we've got a battle plan. First, we'll decode the exam itself. Then we'll march right into the thick of it, the algebra gauntlet, where they test your logic under fire. Then there's the trig and vector challenge, which is all about spatial thinking. After that, we climb the dreaded calculus mountain. And we'll wrap up the subjects with the puzzles of probability. And stick around, because at the end, we'll talk about why this exam is, well, it's about a lot more than just math.
Okay, so let's set the stage a bit. Who's taking this thing? We're talking about some of the brightest 12th graders in the entire country, all aiming for a spot in the Army, Navy, or Air Force. And this math paper, it's the first huge hurdle. It's not just about what you know, it's about how you think, how you reason, and whether you can keep your cool when the clock is ticking like mad.
You know, something that's actually really cool about this exam is how it's presented. The whole booklet is bilingual. You've got Hindi on one page and English right next to it. And that's not just a small detail, right? It's a pretty big statement. It's about making sure that no matter where you come from, language isn't going to be the thing that holds you back.
All right, let's dive into our first major subject, algebra. And nope, this is not your high school solve for X kind of stuff. I mean, it is, but it's so much more. Think of it as the bedrock of logical thinking, and it makes up a huge, huge part of this paper.
And this scope, it's absolutely massive. You've got everything from the basics like sets, relations, and functions, all the way to complex numbers, quadratic equations, you name it. Sequences, series, permutations, matrices, determinants, the list just goes on. It's a real test of just how wide and deep your math foundation is.
So here's a question for you. How would you figure out the remainder when a massive number, like 5 to the power of 99, is divided by 13? I mean, you can't just type that into your calculator, right? It would just give you an error. This needs a totally different approach.
And what do you know? That's exactly what question 9 on the paper asks. And this is what's so clever about this exam. It's not testing if you can do a massive calculation. No way. It's testing if you understand number theory. It's all about finding a smart, elegant pattern instead of trying to brute force your way through an impossible problem.
Okay, so from the pure abstract logic of algebra, we're now jumping into something much more visual. Trigonometry and vectors. This is where you get into angles, triangles, and, well, the tools you need to understand things like force and direction. You can see why this is pretty critical stuff for a future military officer, right?
Yeah, this is where the theory starts to feel really practical. Of course, you've got to know your trig identities like the back of your hand. But then you have to apply all that to vectors and to 3D geometry. We're talking about the math behind navigation and even ballistics. Pretty important.
Okay, let me throw a puzzle at you to see what I mean. Picture a parallelogram floating in 3D space. You don't know any of its corner points. All you have are the two vectors that make up its sides. How on earth do you calculate its area?
Well, take a look at question 68, because that's the exact problem they give you. The secret here is the vector cross product. If you know that the magnitude of that cross product is the area, you've got it. It's just such a beautiful connection between an abstract math operation and a real physical shape.
All right, brace yourselves. We're about to start climbing what many people think is the toughest part of this exam, what I like to call Calculus Mountain. This is the math of how things change, how they move, the math of infinity itself. If you're going to be an engineer or a scientist, this stuff is your bread and butter, and the NDA exam knows it. And believe me, the climb is steep. You start with the basics, like limits and derivatives, which is really just a fancy way of talking about rates of change at a single instant. Then you get to integrals, which kind of do the opposite. They let you add up an infinite number of tiny things, like finding the area under a weird curvy shape.
So think about this. It's a classic calculus problem. Forget about simple squares and circles. How would you find the precise area of some irregular shape that's bounded by a curve on top and straight lines on the sides?
And yep, you guessed it, that's what question 74 is all about. They give you a tricky curve and ask for the area underneath it.
It's a textbook application of something called a definite integral. You have to set it up just right, calculate it, and boom, it's a pure test of a core calculus skill. Okay, for our last big math topic, we're moving from the world of absolute certainty in calculus to the messy world of, well, uncertainty. We're talking probability and statistics. This is all about making sense of data, figuring out risks, and trying to predict the future. And you can imagine, for any kind of leader or strategist, these skills are absolutely essential.
Basically, this part of the exam wants to see if you can think like a data analyst. Can you take a pile of numbers and describe it using things like averages and standard deviation? And more than that, can you use concepts like probability to make educated guesses about what might happen next?
So, what if I gave you this problem? You've got a bunch of student test scores, but you don't have each individual score. All you know is how many students scored in certain ranges, like 10 kids scored between 80 and 90. How would you figure out the average for the whole class? Well, that's precisely the puzzle in question 117. They give you a table of data, exactly like that, and ask you to find the arithmetic mean, which is just the fancy term for the average. It shows, again, that this isn't just about plugging numbers into a formula. It's about how you handle data that's a little bit messy, like it is in the real world.
So, we've walked through all the big math topics, but here's the thing. Just knowing the material isn't enough to pass, not even close. To actually succeed on this exam, you need a whole other skill, strategy. And that's something you won't find in any textbook.
And this is the reason why. Negative marking. For every single wrong answer, they deduct 1/3 of the points you get for a correct one. That changes the entire game. It means you can't just guess wildly. Every single question you answer is a calculated risk.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the recipe for success? It's really three things. First, you've got to know your stuff, inside and out. That's a given. Second, you have to be fast and accurate under that crushing time pressure. And third, and this might be the most important, you need the strategic smarts to know when to answer, when to take an educated guess, and when to just skip the question and move on. Which kind of brings us to the big picture, doesn't it? An exam this hard, this intense, it's doing more than just checking your math homework. It's a filter. It's designed to find a very specific kind of person, someone who's not just smart, but also fast, precise, and strategic when the pressure is on. It really makes you think, what else does a test like this reveal about a person?